Method of loci.
The method of loci, also called the memory palace, is a mnemonic device introduced in ancient Roman and Greek rhetorical treatises. In basic terms, it is a method of memory enhancement which uses visualization to organize and recall information. Many memory contest champions claim to use this technique to recall faces, digits, and lists of words. These champions' successes have little to do with brain structure or intelligence, but more to do with their technique of using regions of their brain that have to do with spatial learning. The term is most often found in specialized works on psychology, neurobiology and memory, though it was used in the same general way at least as early as the first half of the 19th century in works on rhetoric, logic and philosophy. John O'Keefe and Lynn Nadel refer to the items to be remembered in this mnemonic system are mentally associated with specific physical locations. The method relies on memorized spatial relationships to establish order and recollect memorial content. It is also known as the journey method, used for storing lists of related items, or the Roman room technique, which is most effective for storing unrelated information.
Contemporary usage.
Many effective memorizers today use the method of loci to some degree. Contemporary memory competition was initiated in 1991 and the first United States Championship was held in 1997. Part of the competition requires committing to memory and recalling a sequence of digits, two-digit numbers, alphabetic letters, or playing cards. In a simple method of doing this, contestants, using various strategies well before competing, commit to long-term memory a unique vivid image associated with each item. They have also committed to long-term memory a familiar route with firmly established stop points or loci. Then in the competition they need only deposit the image that they have associated with each item at the loci. To recall, they retrace the route, stop at each locus, and observe the image. They then translate this back to the associated item. Memory champions elaborate on this by combining images. 8-time world memory champion Dominic O'Brien uses this technique. The 2006 world memory champion, Clemens Mayer from Germany, used a 300-point-long journey through his house for his world record in number half marathon, memorizing 1040 random digits in a half hour. Gary Shang has used the method of loci to memorize pi to over 65,536 digits. Using this technique, a person with ordinary memorization capabilities, after establishing the route stop points and committing the associated images to long-term memory, with less than an hour of practice, can remember the sequence of a shuffled deck of cards. The world record for this is held by Simon Reinhard at 21.19 seconds. The technique is taught as a metacognitive technique in learning to learn courses. It is generally applied to encoding the key ideas of a subject. Two approaches are: link the key ideas of a subject and then deep learn those key ideas in relation to each other, and think through the key ideas of a subject in depth, rearrange the ideas in relation to an argument, then link the ideas to loci in good order. The Rhetorica ad Hernium and most other sources recommend that the method of loci should be integrated with elaborative encoding, that is, adding visual, auditory, or other details, to strengthen memory. However, due to the strength of spatial memory, simply mentally placing objects in real or imagined locations without further elaboration can be effective for simple associations. A recent variation of the method of loci involves creating imaginary locations, houses, palaces, roads, and cities, to which the same procedure is applied. It is accepted that there is a greater cost involved in the initial setup, but thereafter the performance is in line with the standard loci method. The purported advantage is to create towns and cities that each represent a topic or an area of study, thus offering an efficient filing of the information and an easy path for the regular review necessary for long-term memory storage. Something that is likely a reference to the method of loci techniques survives to this day in the common English phrases "in the first place," "in the second place," and so forth.
Applicability of the term.
The designation is not used with strict consistency. In some cases it refers broadly to what is otherwise known as the art of memory, the origins of which are related, according to tradition, in the story of Simonides of Chios and the collapsing banquet hall. For example, after relating the story of how Simonides relied on remembered seating arrangements to call to mind the faces of recently deceased guests, Stephen M. Koslin remarks his insight led to the development of a technique the Greeks called the method of loci, which is a systematic way of improving one's memory by using imagery. Scholes and Sagan indicate that an ancient technique of memorization called method of loci, by which memories are referenced directly onto spatial maps, originated with the story of Simonides. Referring to mnemonic methods, Verley Williams mentions, one such strategy is the loci method, which was developed by Simonides, a Greek poet of the 5th and 6th centuries BC. Loftus cites the foundation story of Simonides, more or less taken from Francis Yates, and describes some of the most basic aspects of the use of space in the art of memory. She states, this particular mnemonic technique has come to be called the method of loci. While place or position certainly figured prominently in ancient mnemonic techniques, no designation equivalent to method of loci was used exclusively to refer to mnemonic schemes relying upon space for organization. In other cases the designation is generally consistent, but more specific. The method of loci is a mnemonic device involving the creation of a visual map of one's house. This term can be misleading. The ancient principles and techniques of the art of memory, hastily glossed in some of the works cited above, depended equally upon images and places. The designator method of loci does not convey the equal weight placed on both elements. Training in the art or arts of memory as a whole, as attested in classical antiquity, was far more inclusive and comprehensive in the treatment of this subject.
Spatial mnemonics and specific brain activation.
Brain scans of superior memorizers, 90% of whom use the method of loci technique, have shown that it involves activation of regions of the brain involved in spatial awareness, such as the medial parietal cortex, retrosplenial cortex, and the right posterior hippocampus. The medial parietal cortex is most associated with encoding and retrieving of information. Patients who have medial parietal cortex damage have trouble linking landmarks with certain locations. Many of these patients are unable to give or follow directions and often got lost. The retrosplenial cortex is also linked to memory and navigation. In one study on the effects of selective granular retrosplenial cortex lesions in rats, the researcher found that damage to the retrosplenial cortex led to impaired spatial learning abilities. Rats with damage to this area failed to recall which areas of the maze they had already visited, rarely explored different arms of the maze, almost never recalled the maze in future trials, and took longer to reach the end of the maze, as compared to rats with a fully working retrosplenial cortex. In a classic study in cognitive neuroscience, O'Keefe and Nadell proposed that the hippocampus is the core of a neural memory system, providing an objective spatial framework within which the items and events of an organism's experience are located and interrelated.
In popular culture. Literature.
In the 1981 fantasy classic Little, Big by John Crowley, advisor Maj Ariel Hawksquill uses the method to link obscure information to aid her clients, and notes that the technique is employed by the fictional serial killer Hannibal Lecter in Hannibal, and Hannibal Rising, novels by American author Thomas Harris. In several passages in these books, Lecter is described as mentally walking through an elaborate memory palace to remember facts. The technique is depicted in the Matthew Riley book Scarecrow and the Army of Thieves. The main character, Shane Schofield, uses the technique to lock away good memories and prevent psychological torture. The technique is mentioned in Hilary Mantel's book Wolf Hall. The protagonist, Thomas Cromwell, uses the technique, and makes reference to Cicero's story of Simonides of Chios remembering the locations of all the guests after he escapes being crushed by the collapsing roof. The technique is also the main focus of the book Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Foer. The technique is often used by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child's agent Pendergast. Derren Brown, in his book Tricks of the Mind, showed how to use the loci system in conjunction with the linking and number pegging system. He demonstrated the technique in the BBC4 series Trick of the Mind.
Television.
The technique was depicted in the BBC television series Sherlock in the second episode of the second series, The Hounds of Baskerville, where Sherlock Holmes uses his mind palace to seek and reassemble important facts and associations in his memory which were relevant to the case. In The Empty Hearse, first episode of its third series, Sherlock pretends to access his mind palace in order to defuse a bomb. The method is also seen again in episodes 2 and 3 of Series 3. In episode 2, The Sign of 3, he uses the mind palace to organize an interrogation. In episode 3, His Last Vow, the technique is again used by Sherlock to survive being shot in the chest. In this episode it was also used by the main antagonist, Charles Augustus Magnusson, as a method of storing vast amounts of blackmail material. Holmes uses the method of loci to recall where he heard a phrase in CBS's Sherlock Holmes adaptation Elementary, in the episode called The Long Fuse. The memory palace concept is also used in several episodes of the CBS series The Mentalist by the titular mentalist Patrick Jane to help colleagues and witnesses remember things such as playing card locations in a deck or information and names of guests at a party. The concept was illustrated in the episode of the documentary television series, The Day the Universe Changed titled A Matter of Fact, in which James Burke explains how it was used in medieval times when literacy was rare for sophisticated scholastic and business affairs. The television show Leverage, the team of thieves execute a con completely revolving around the concept of a Roman room. The reunion Job, Will Graham in NBC's Hannibal uses a mind palace to escape from his surroundings and retain some sanity in Season 2.
Film.
A version of the technique, dubbed the Memory Warehouse, appears in the 2003 film Dreamcatcher, granted to the film's four main characters as a result of contact with an alien that takes the form of a young boy they befriend who calls himself Duddits. In the film, the Memory Warehouse is a place where all of the characters' thoughts and memories take the form of physical files that can be interacted with, and burned when necessary. The character Jonesy keeps an entire section of the Memory Warehouse dedicated specifically to his memories and theories regarding Duddits, which he must recover and hide after an antagonistic alien takes over his body.
Notes.
Joshak, P.W. Klein, R.M., eds. August 1, 1980. The Nature of Thought, Essays in Honor of D.O. Hebe. Hillsdale, New Jersey. Psychology Press pages 217-218. ISBN 0898590345. For example, in a discussion of topical memory, yet another designator, Jameson mentions that memorial lines, or verses, are more useful than the method of loci. Alexander Jameson, A Grammar of Logic and Intellectual Philosophy, A. H. Maltby, 1835, p. 112. O'Keefe, John. Nadal, Lynn, December 7, 1978. The Hippocampus as a Cognitive Map. Oxford, Oxford University Press. ISBN 978-0198572060. Carlson, Neil R. 2010. Psychology: The Science of Behavior. Pearson Canada Incorporated pages 245. ISBN 9780205645244. The Roman Room Technique. academictips.org. Retrieved October 24, 2013. Fua, Joshua, March 16, 2005. Forget Me Not, How to Win the U.S. Memory Championship. Slate. Retrieved October 24, 2013. 1997 World Memory Championships. Mind Sports Worldwide. Archived from the original on May 14, 2011. Retrieved October 24, 2013. Raz, A. Packard, M.G. Alexander, G.M. Bull, J.T. Tsu, H. U. S. Peterson, B.S. 2009. A Slice of P, an exploratory neuroimaging study of digit encoding and retrieval in a superior memorist. Neurocus 15, 5, 361-372 doi, 10.1080/13554790902776896. PMID 19585350. Edit. 5-minute speed cards. World Memory Statistics. World Memory Sports Council. Retrieved October 24, 2013. Bramer, Rod, September 20, 2011. The Manual, A Guide to the Ultimate Study Method, USM. Cambridge, United Kingdom, Fund Sapientiae Publishing. ISBN 978-0956990709, Finger, Stanley, October 11, 2001. Origins of Neuroscience, A History of Explorations into Brain Function. Oxford, Oxford University Press. Pages 333. ISBN 978-0195146943, Francis Yates, The Art of Memory, University of Chicago, 1966, p1-2, Stephen M. Koslin, Imagery and Learning in, Michael S. Gazaniga, ed. Perspectives in Memory Research, MIT Press, 1988, p245. It should be noted that Koslin fails to cite any example of the use of an equivalent term in period Greek or Latin sources. John Robert Skoyles, Dorian Sagan, Up from Dragons, The Evolution of Human Intelligence, McGraw-Hill, 2002, p150. Linda Verlee Williams, Teaching for the Two-Sided Mind, A Guide to Right Brain Left Brain Education, Simon & Schuster, 1986, p110. Elizabeth F. Loftus, Human Memory, The Processing of Information, Lawrence Elbaum Associates, 1976, p65. For example, Aristotle referred to topoi, places, in which memorial content could be aggregated, hence our modern term topics, while another primary classical source, Rhetorica ad Hierneum, BK3, discusses rules for places and images. In general, classical and medieval sources describe these techniques as the art or arts of memory, ars memorativa or art memorativi, rather than as any putative method of loci. Nor is the imprecise designation current in specialized historical studies. For example, Mary Carruthers uses the term architectural mnemonic to describe what is otherwise designated method of loci. Gutman, Sharon A. December 1, 2007. Quick reference: Neuroscience for Rehabilitation Professionals. Thoreau, New Jersey, SLAC Incorporated. Pages 216. ISBN 978-1556428,005. Maguire, E. A. Valentine, E. R. Wilding, J. M. Kappa, N. 2002. Roots to Remembering, The Brains Behind Superior Memory. Nature Neuroscience 6, 1, 90-95 doi, 10.1038/NN988. PMID 12483214, Paris. Roger. Rizzo, Matthew, February 13, 2008. Neuroergonomics. New York, Oxford University Press. Pages 139. ISBN 978-0195368659. Haussabis, D. Chu, C. Rees, G. Wieskopf, N. Molyneux, P. D. Maguire, E. A. 2009. Decoding Neuronal Ensembles in the Human Hippocampus. Current Biology 19, 7, 546-554 doi, 10.1016/J. Cub. 2009.02.033. PMC 2670980. PMID 19285400. Harris, Thomas, 1999. Hannibal. Della Corte Press. ISBN 0-385-29929-.